The phone screen shattered against the lab floor before I could stop myself. 3 missed calls from Bayview Recovery Center. 3 text messages I couldn't bear to read. I had calculated everything in my life to the decimal point. Yet here I was, watching the fragments of my family scatter like broken glass across the sterile tiles of the Fremont Biotech Lab. Felix started again. The words burned in my throat as I spoke them to no one. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across my workstation. Equations for market volatility filled my monitors, but they blurred before my eyes. My hands trembled as I tried to steady myself against the cold metal lab table. 45 years of meticulous planning, and I had no algorithm for this. My son's addiction had become a statistical certainty, not if, but when. The 3rd relapse in 14 months. I had told everyone at the office we were simply working through some things. The practice phrase felt hollow now, like the emptiness spreading through my chest. The security guard's footsteps echoed down the hallway. I quickly straightened my lab coat and wiped my eyes. "Working late again, Doctor Lee?" he asked. "Yes, a critical deadline." My voice remained measured, controlled. The facade of the successful quantitative trader maintained. I had perfected this response. Emotions were inefficient variables in my carefully constructed equation of life. The moment he left, I collapsed into my chair. My phone buzzed again from the floor. "Kelsey." I couldn't answer, couldn't explain how I had failed to see the signs again, how the prescription pills for Felix's soccer injury had given way to harder substances, how our children were watching their brother disappear 1 dose at a time, while Kelsey and I fought about the proper response. Just pay for the best treatment and let the professionals handle it, I had argued that morning. Emotional involvement clouds judgment and creates a crutch. "He's our son, not a business problem," Kelsey had shot back, her Georgia accent thickening with frustration. "He needs his family, not just expensive therapy." The small radio on my desk suddenly crackled to life. Timer activated. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The old hymn my college roommate used to sing. I lunged to silence it, knocking over a framed photo of our family vacation. Before the addiction, before the arguments, before Kelsey started looking at me like I was a stranger. I turned back to my computer screen, desperate to lose myself in the predictability of numbers. The formulas made sense. They followed rules. Unlike addiction, unlike marriage, unlike the God my grandmother had trusted so completely. My phone lit up with a text from Nova. "Dad, Mom's crying again. When are you coming home?" My blood ran cold. Kelsey had discovered Felix's latest relapse from a call from the recovery center, not from me, not from her husband, who promised to handle everything. She had been forced to pick up our broken son while I sat in a lab, hiding behind equations. Lynn had left 17 missed calls. Nova had simply sent a single question mark. Kelsey's last message was just 2 words: "Come home." I had failed them completely. The careful strategy I had constructed, pay for the best treatment, maintain professional distance, let experts handle the critical components, had left my family drowning while I calculated optimal outcomes from a distance. The drive home stretched before me like an unsolvable equation. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The radio turned on automatically when I started the car. That hymn again. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. I nearly punched the power button. What did an ancient song know about modern addiction, about watching your son transform into a stranger, about explaining to your wife why emotional distance was preferable to emotional involvement, about maintaining your professional reputation while your family life imploded? My phone rang through the car speakers. Felix's counselor at the treatment center. Mr. Lee, I wanted to discuss our family therapy recommendations. Felix needs more engagement from both parents. Mrs. Lee has been very involved, but we haven't seen you since the intake meeting 3 months ago. I'm paying for the best care available, I said automatically. My involvement would be redundant. Andrew, she said gently, healing from addiction requires relationship, not just resources. Felix asks about you constantly. The use of my first name broke something in me. The careful compartmentalization I had constructed between professional Andrew and Father Andrew dissolved. Between successful Andrew and failing Andrew, between the Andrew who had everything under control and the Andrew who was losing his family. I pulled into our driveway to find Kelsey's car missing. The house was dark except for a single light in Nova's room. I climbed the stairs with dread building in my chest. Where's your mother? I asked Nova, who was supposed to be asleep. She left, Nova said, her 10-year-old voice carefully neutral. She said she's staying at Aunt Clarice's until you figure out what's more important, being right or being a family. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat heavily on Nova's bed, trying to understand the cost of my decisions. I had calculated every variable, except the one that mattered most. Love couldn't be enhanced from a distance. Sitting in my daughter's bedroom with my wife gone and my son fighting for his life, I finally admitted what I had been denying for months. I couldn't fix this. Not with money, not with professional distance, not with strategic planning. The addiction tearing through my family required something I had systematically avoided: vulnerability, presence, and the terrifying possibility that I might not be able to control the outcome. 6 months earlier, my life seemed a perfect equation. Andrew Lee, the quantitative trader with the golden touch, married to Kelsey, the warm-hearted Georgia native who had somehow fallen in love with me despite my methodical approach to everything. We'd been together 15 years, our differences balancing like variables in a well-designed algorithm. Kelsey managed our household with the kind of intuitive wisdom that had drawn me to her in the first place. Where I saw problems requiring systematic solutions, she saw people needing love and attention. Felix excelled at debate team. Nova practiced violin with dedication that made me proud, and Lynn's advanced science projects filled our refrigerator with blue ribbons. Andrew, you need to connect with the children emotionally, not just intellectually, Kelsey would say, her voice gentle but persistent. They need their father present, not just providing. I remember dismissing her concerns with logical explanations. I'm ensuring their future security. What I couldn't articulate to Kelsey was, although I craved love from her and our kids, I didn't know how to show my feelings any other way. My parents immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5, bringing with them a cultural framework that prioritized achievement over feelings, respect over intimacy. Success was measured in grades, income, and social status, not in hugs or heart-to-heart conversations. My morning routine was a carefully calibrated symphony. Rise at 4:30 a.m., review Asian market closing, prepare breakfast for the family, then drive to my private office overlooking the Fremont Biotech complex, where I consulted part-time. Kelsey would handle the children's needs, physical and emotional, while I managed their practical requirements. It seemed efficient, complementary. "You're a good provider, honey," Kelsey said one evening as I worked through dinner, laptop open beside my plate. "But the children need more than financial security. They need to know you're interested in their inner lives." The first crack in our system appeared during Felix's sophomore year. He'd been struggling with anxiety about college applications, but I approached it like any other optimization problem: more tutoring, better scheduling, strategic extracurricular activities. "Felix needs someone to listen to his fears, not just solve his problems," Kelsey argued after finding our son crying in his room following a particularly intense study session I'd organized. "Emotional indulgence creates weakness," I replied, echoing something my father had said to me countless times. "Success requires discipline, not coddling." The warning signs were there, subtle disruptions in my carefully balanced household equation. Felix started missing family dinners, claiming study group obligations. His grades remained high, so I saw no cause for concern. Kelsey noticed the changes in his demeanor, his increasing isolation, but I dismissed her intuitive parenting as overprotection. "Something's wrong with Felix," Kelsey said one night after the girls were asleep. "He's not himself. He seems distant, hollow." I calculate the probability of teenage adjustment difficulties versus serious problems and concluded her concerns were within normal parameters. Academic pressure affects all high-achieving students. He'll adapt. My parents called weekly, always focusing on the children's accomplishments: Felix's debate victories, Nova's musical progress, Lynn's science awards. They never asked about emotional well-being or family relationships, questions that would have seemed irrelevant to their framework of success. "Andrew is raising excellent children," my mother would tell Kelsey during their brief, polite phone conversations. "Very disciplined, very focused. This is how proper families function." But Kelsey came from a different world. Her Georgia family gathered for long Sunday dinners filled with laughter, argument, and emotional messiness that made me deeply uncomfortable. Her parent asked probing questions about feelings, offered unsolicited advice about relationships, and seemed to view every family meal as an opportunity for psychological excavation. "Your family talks about everything," I complained after one particularly intense visit to Kelsey's parents. "Some things should remain private." "And your family talks about nothing that matters," Kelsey replied, her frustration finally breaking through her usual patience. "When's the last time you told your parents you loved them? When's the last time you asked them about their feelings instead of their achievements?" The question stung because they exposed the truth I'd been avoiding. My relationship with my parents was transactional. I provided evidence of success. They provided approval. Love was assumed but never expressed, a constant that required no maintenance or acknowledgement. As Felix's junior year progressed, the distance between Kelsey and me widened. She wanted family therapy to address Felix's increasing emotional volatility. I wanted to hire additional tutors to ensure his academic performance remained strong. She pushed for more family time and open communication. I scheduled more structured activities and achievement-focused interactions. "You're treating our son like a project," Kelsey said after I presented a detailed academic plan for Felix's remaining high school years. He's not a problem to be solved. He's a person who needs love and understanding. Love doesn't pay for college, I replied. Understanding doesn't create opportunities. Results matter more than feelings. The philosophical divide between us had become a chasm. Kelsey's Southern upbringing had taught her that family problems require family solutions, emotional engagement, spiritual support, and community involvement. My Asian heritage had taught me that family problems require individual excellence, professional intervention, and private resolution. Neither of us realized that Felix was drowning in the space between our different approaches to love, while Kelsey tried to draw him into emotional conversations he'd learned to avoid, and I pushed him toward achievements that felt increasingly meaningless. Our son found solace in the one thing that demanded nothing from him except surrender: drugs. The night everything changed, I was working late at the lab, improving an algorithm for predicting market volatility. My phone buzzed with a call from Kelsey, but I was deep in concentration, chasing a mathematical breakthrough that felt more important than whatever domestic issue required my attention. The second call came 20 minutes later, then the third. By the time I listened to her voicemails, Felix was already in the emergency room, unconscious from an opioid overdose at a party I didn't know he'd attended. Driving to the hospital, I tried to calculate what had gone wrong with my family management system. All the variables had been properly controlled: academic performance maintained, financial security established, professional treatment, resources identified and acquired. How had I failed to predict this outcome? In the hospital waiting room, Kelsey sat alone, her face streaked with tears, clutching a small Bible I'd never seen before. When our eyes met, I saw not accusation, but devastating sadness. "I've been praying," she said quietly. "I don't know what else to do." I sat beside her, helpless in the face of a crisis my algorithm couldn't solve. For the first time in our marriage, I had no plan, no strategy, no systematic approach to manage the situation. I could only sit and wait, watching my wife pray to a God I'd never learned to trust. That night marked the beginning of the end of my carefully controlled world. Though I didn't recognize it yet, I still believed I could engineer a solution to Felix's addiction. I still thought love could be expressed through optimal resource allocation rather than emotional vulnerability. I had no idea that my greatest challenge wouldn't be saving my son, but learning to surrender my need to save everyone through my own strength. After watching addiction nearly claim our son's life, I did what any quantitative trader would do. I created a comprehensive recovery strategy. The numbers had never failed me before. The algorithm I designed at the Fremont Biotech Labs always yielded predictable outcomes when variables were properly managed. My first attempt was purely systematic. I researched the top addiction treatment facilities in California, interviewed medical directors, analyzed success rates, and selected the program with the highest recovery statistics. Felix would receive the best care money could buy, managed by professionals with proven track records. He needs the most advanced treatment available, I explained to Kelsey as I presented my research findings. Emotional involvement from family members can actually interfere with therapeutic progress. We should maintain supportive distance while experts handle the clinical aspects. Kelsey stared at me across our kitchen table, her eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and mounting anger. "Andrew, He's our baby, our son. He doesn't need distance. He needs to know we love him enough to fight for him. Love is ensuring optimal care, I replied, showing her comparative data on my laptop. The research clearly indicates that family enmeshment can compromise recovery outcomes. Felix entered the program with my characteristic efficiency: private room, individual therapy sessions, cutting-edge medical monitoring. I visited once during the intake process, reviewed his treatment plan with clinical precision, and left satisfied that I provided the best possible intervention. Kelsey, however, attended every family session, drove the hour each way to participate in group meeting, and spent weekends at the facility learning about addiction, codependency, and family dynamics. She came home from these sessions with red-rimmed eyes and stories about other families' journeys that I found disturbing and irrelevant. The counselor says, "Felix feels abandoned by you," Kelsey reported after one particularly emotional family session. "He says you dropped him off like a broken appliance to be repaired." "I provided him with professional care," I responded. "My involvement would be redundant and potentially counterproductive." The philosophical battle lines were drawn. Kelsey embraced what she called the hands-on healing approach: emotional engagement, spiritual support, and intensive family involvement. I maintain what I considered the professional intervention model: optimal resources, expert management, and minimal emotional contamination. The second phase of my strategy involved enhancing our home environment. I removed all potential triggers, installed monitoring systems, and created structured schedules designed to support Felix's reintegration. Every variable was controlled, every contingency planned. Kelsey found my environmental modifications cold and invasive. "You've turned our home into a medical facility," she said, surveying the locked cabinets, security cameras, and behavioral tracking charts I'd install. "This isn't love, it's surveillance." "This is protection," I countered. "Addiction is a disease requiring medical management, not emotional indulgence." The divide between us widened with each passing week. Kelsey wanted family dinners filled with conversation about feelings and fears. I wanted structured meal times focused on nutritional requirements and academic planning. She pushed for family therapy sessions where we explore our emotional dynamics. I scheduled individual appointments with specialists who could address specific behavioral modifications. The woman I love more than my next breath seemed to be slipping away. "You're treating Felix like a problem to be solved instead of a son to be loved," Kelsey said after I presented a detailed relapse prevention protocol I'd developed. "And you're treating me like I'm incompetent because I believe in prayer and presence instead of charts and strategies. Your approach lacks systematic rigor," I replied. "Emotional decisions compromise optimal outcomes." The cultural fault lines that had always existed in our marriage became chasms during this crisis. Kelsey's Southern upbringing had taught her that family problems require community solutions, church support, extended family involvement, and faith-based healing. My Taiwanese heritage had instilled the belief that family problems require individual excellence, professional discretion, and private resolution. Neither of us had changed. Maybe that was the problem. Felix counselor, Dr. Martinez, called for a family meeting 6 weeks into his treatment. I arrived prepared with data on his progress, medication compliance chart, and questions about maximizing his therapeutic protocol. Kelsey arrived with tissues, a journal filled with prayers and stories about other families who found healing through faith and emotional connection. Felix is struggling with feelings of rejection and abandonment, Dr. Martinez explained. He interprets his father's absence as confirmation that he's too damaged to deserve love. I've provided optimal care, I said, confused by the assessment. He has access to the best medical professionals available. Andrew, Dr. Martinez said gently, addiction isn't just a medical condition. It's often a response to emotional pain and disconnection. Felix needs to know he matters to you as a person, not just as a problem to be solved. The session ended with an ultimatum I found unreasonable. Either I would participate actively in family therapy and emotional healing processes, or Felix's treatment would be compromised. The medical model I trusted was being contaminated by psychological theories I consider unscientific. That night, Kelsey sat me down for the most serious conversation of our marriage. I can't do this anymore, she said, her voice steady but final. I can't watch you treat our son like a broken machine while I try to love him back to wholeness. I can't pretend that your way is working when it's clearly failing. My approach is evidence-based, I argued. Your emotional involvement is counterproductive. Then we want different things, Kelsey replied. I want our son to know he's loved unconditionally. You want him fixed efficiently. Those aren't the same goal. The next morning, I woke to find Kelsey packing a suitcase. Nova and Lynn sat on the bed watching their mother fold clothes with mechanical precision that reminded me of my own systematic approach to crisis management. Where are you going? I asked, though I suspected I knew. To my sister Rachel's in Atlanta, Kelsey said without looking up. School's out. I'm taking the girls for a few weeks. Felix gets out of treatment at the end of the month, and he needs at least one parent who believes in fighting for him with love instead of just money. This is an overreaction, I said, calculating the disruption this would cause to our household. Let's talk about it. We can resolve this through rational discussion. Kelsey finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, but profound sadness. Andrew, you've spent 15 years trying to improve our family in ways I don't fully understand. Instead of showing us the love in your heart, I don't think you know the difference anymore. The door closed behind them with quiet finality. I stood in our empty house, surrounded by all the system and structures I created to ensure optimal family functioning, yet somehow I engineered the very isolation I've been trying to prevent. I had no algorithm for fixing what was broken. My systematic approach had driven away the people I love and want to protect. It made no sense. How had my approach created such personal destruction? The formula for control had become the formula for emptiness. The silence in our house was deafening. 2 weeks had passed since Kelsey left with Nova and Lynn, and I moved through our empty rooms like a ghost haunting his own life. Felix would be discharged from treatment in 3 days, and I had no idea how to be the father he needed without Kelsey there to translate my analytical love into emotional warmth. I tried calling my parents for guidance, something I'd never done in my adult life. The conversation was stilted, formal, conducted in Mandarin with careful politeness that revealed nothing about feelings or fears. Son is improving? My father asked. The treatment metrics are positive, I replied. Good. Family reputation important. Private matters stay private. Yes, Father. Wife returns soon. I paused, unable to explain that Kelsey had left because I'd become too much like them. Emotionally distant, systematically focused, more concerned with appearances than authentic connection. Uncertain, I said finally. The disappointment in my father's silence was familiar, the same disapproval I'd felt whenever I'd failed to meet their exacting standards as a child. But for the first time, I wondered if their standards had cost them something precious. The kind of relationship Kelsey's family shared, messy and emotional and deeply connected. Felix called twice during his final week of treatment. Both conversations were awkward, filled with long pauses and careful words. Mom visited every week, he said during the second call. She says you're busy with work. I'm ensuring your transition home is properly planned, I replied, which was true but insufficient. I had created detailed schedules, researched outpatient programs, and adjusted our household for his return. Dad, Felix said quietly, I don't need you to fix me. I need you to love me. The words hung between us like an accusation. I had no response because I genuinely didn't understand the distinction he was making. Wasn't providing the best possible care an expression of love? Wasn't ensuring the best outcomes the most loving thing a father could do? I'll see you Friday, I said, and we both hung up unsatisfied. The night before Felix's discharge, I sat in my home office surrounded by treatment protocols, therapy schedules, and relapse prevention strategies. Everything was organized, analyzed, improved, yet I felt more helpless than ever. My phone buzzed with a text from Kelsey. Praying for you both tomorrow. Felix needs his father, not a case manager. I stared at the message for a long time. Kelsey had mentioned prayer several times since leaving, something she'd never done regularly during our marriage. I wondered what had changed for her in Atlanta, what she'd found that I was missing. Unable to sleep, I drove to the lab and worked through the night, trying to lose myself in market algorithms that still made sense when nothing else did. At 3 a.m., exhaustion finally overwhelmed my need for control. The weight of failing my wife and kids crushed me. I cried at my desk, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from a place I kept sealed for decades. I don't know how to love him, I whispered to the empty lab. I don't know how to love any of them. The admission hung in the air like a prayer I didn't know how to pray. I wish I believed in something larger than my own analytical capabilities, something that could fill the emotional void my analytical approaches created. I picked up Felix alone the next morning. He looked healthier physically, but his eyes held a wariness that broke my heart. During the drive home, we spoke in the careful language of strangers trying not to cause offense. The house looks different, Felix said as we pulled into our driveway. I'd removed all the monitoring equipment and security systems, finally recognizing that surveillance wasn't the same as safety, but the house still felt sterile, empty of the warmth Kelsey and the girls had provided. Your mother and sisters will return when I started? Then stop, eh? When what? When I learned to be human instead of just efficient? Kelsey hadn't answered that question when asked, so I had no answer to give. Felix went straight to his room and closed the door. I stood in our kitchen, surrounded by all the meal plans and behavioral protocols I prepared, understanding that none of them addressed what my son actually needed. To know he was valued for who he was, not just for his potential to recover successfully. That evening, Felix emerged for dinner, a carefully balanced meal I prepared according to nutritional guidelines from the treatment center. We ate in silence, the space between us filled with everything I didn't know how to say. Dad, Felix said finally, why don't you ever ask me how I'm feeling? The question stunned me. I review your progress reports with your therapist weekly. Your emotional status is being professionally monitored. That's not what I mean, Felix said, his voice patient but sad. When's the last time you asked me a question that wasn't about grades or goals or getting better? When's the last time you asked me what I'm afraid of or what makes me happy? I realized with growing horror that I couldn't remember. Every conversation I ever had with my children had been focused on outcomes, achievements, or problems to be solved. I'd never learned to ask about their inner lives because no one had ever asked about mine. I don't know how, I admitted, the words feeling like failure and relief simultaneously. Felix looked at me with something that might have been compassion. Mom taught me that it's okay not to know how to do something. She said that's when you ask for help. That night after Felix went to bed, I called Kelsey, not to argue about strategy or defend my approach, but to tell her I was lost. You know me, Kelsey. When we met, I had a hard time showing my feelings, I said. Yeah, you did. But there was something in your eyes, your face that said more than words could have, she said. You can read me better than anyone, and I'm lucky to have you in my life. I love you, I said. You and the kids, my family, is my everything. I work hard to make sure you have what you need, I explained. I know. The kids know, she said. But, honey, money can't buy everything. Remember when we were dating? My best memories are when we sat watching television, talking about the movies and laughing at how silly the girl was to run in the rain. What I value most was the time we spent together. The kids need to see that, man. You haven't spent time like that with them since they were babies. Thinking back, I realized she was right. I've spent our marriage trying to improve our family instead of loving you the way you need, I said. I don't know how to be emotionally present. I don't know how to ask the right questions or give the right responses. I'm afraid I'm too broken to learn. The silence stretched between Atlanta and California before Kelsey spoke. Andrew, I've been praying for you, for us. I'm learning that love isn't something you figure out. It's something you surrender to. I don't understand, I said. Come to Atlanta, Kelsey said. Bring Felix. Let me show you what I've been learning about grace. 3 days later, Felix and I boarded a plane for Georgia, carrying only what would fit in our carry-on bags. Atlanta humidity hit me like a wall when we stepped off the plane, but it was nothing compared to the emotional weight of facing my family after weeks of separation. Kelsey waited at baggage claim with Nova and Lynn flanking her like small guards, their expressions carefully neutral. Felix moved toward them with an eagerness that made my chest tight. When was the last time any of my children had run to me with that kind of joy? Hello, Andrew, Kelsey said softly, and I heard something different in her voice. Not anger or resentment, but a calm I'd never associated with my emotional, passionate wife. The drive to Rachel's house was filled with the girls' chatter about Atlanta, the church they'd been attending. Church. Kelsey had mentioned it twice now, this sudden spiritual interest that seemed to have emerged from our family crisis. How's Grandpa Lee? Nova asked from the back seat, and I realized with a shock that my daughters had asked about my parents more in 10 minutes than I had in the past month. I haven't spoken to them recently, I admitted. Dad, they called 3 times last week, Lynn said. Mom made us call them back because she said it wasn't right to ignore family. Even in her absence, Kelsey had been managing the emotional maintenance of my relationships. The recognition of my complete dependence on her for anything requiring empathy was humbling and terrifying. Rachel's house was everything mine wasn't, cluttered with life, filled with the sounds of her 4 children, decorated with family photos that captured genuine moments rather than pose achievements. At dinner, conversation flowed around the table like water, touching on feelings, fears, dreams, and disappointments with equal ease. Uncle Andrew, Rachel's youngest son, asked, "Are you sad that your family is broken?" The adults tensed, but I answered honestly, "Yes, Tyler, I'm very sad, and I'm learning that I helped break it by not knowing how to love well." Tyler nodded solemnly. "Mommy says that's when Jesus helped us learn." After dinner, Kelsey and I walked to a nearby park while Felix bonded with his cousins and the girls helped Rachel with dishes, the kind of natural family rhythm I never learned to participate in. "Tell me about this Jesus thing," I said, immediately regretting how clinical I sounded. Kelsey smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given me since I'd arrived. "It's not a thing, Andrew. It's a relationship. I've been going to Rachel's church, and I've been learning that I can't love our children well if I'm not connected to the source of love itself." "You've always been more emotional than me," I said. "You don't need external support for that." "That's where you're wrong," Kelsey replied. "I was trying to love everyone from my strength, just like you were trying to fix everyone from your intelligence. Neither approach was working because neither of us was drawing from something bigger than ourselves." We sat on a bench overlooking a small pond where ducks moved in lazy circles. The evening air was thick with the sounds of life, children playing, dogs barking, families sharing space and time without agenda. "I've been angry with you for being emotionally distant," Kelsey continued, "but I realized I was just as controlling as you were. I wanted you to express love the way I thought you should, instead of accepting you as you are and trusting God to change your heart." "I don't know how to trust something I can't measure," I said. "Neither did I until I got desperate enough to try," Kelsey replied. "Andrew, I've been praying for you every day since I left, not praying for you to change into who I wanted you to be, but praying for God to show you who you really are underneath all that analysis and control." That night, I called my parents from Rachel's guest room. For the first time in decades, I asked them how they were feeling instead of just reporting our family's achievements. The conversation was awkward, stilted by years of emotional formality, but something shifted when I told them about Felix's addiction, about Kelsey leaving, about my failure to connect with my own children. "Son," my father said in Mandarin, his voice heavy with something I'd never heard before, "we taught you to be strong, but we never taught you to be vulnerable. Maybe we were wrong about some things." The omission hung between us across the phone line. My father, the man who immigrated with nothing and built a successful business through sheer determination, was acknowledging that strength without connection had costs. "I don't know how to fix this," I told him, switching to English because Mandarin didn't have words for what I needed to express. "Maybe fixing is not the goal." My mother's voice came on the line. "Maybe healing is different than fixing." Sunday morning came with an invitation I wanted to refuse. Kelsey asked if I'd join them for church, and everything in my systematic worldview recoiled from the emotional messiness of public worship. But Felix and the girls were eager for me to come. So I found myself sitting in a pew feeling completely out of place. The music was loud, emotional, unstructured in ways that made me profoundly uncomfortable. People around me sang with their hands raised, some crying, some laughing, all expressing feelings that seemed too private for public display. I sat rigid, wondering how much longer the service would last. Then the pastor began speaking about the parable of the prodigal son, and something inside me cracked open. He talked about a father who ran toward his wayward child, who celebrated his return instead of analyzing his failures, who offered relationship instead of consequences. Some of you are the younger son, the pastor said, running away from love because you think you're too broken to deserve it. But some of you are the older son, standing outside the party because you've confused obedience with relationship, performance with love. I was the older son. I spent my entire life performing for approval, working for acceptance, trying to earn through achievement what could only be received as gift. I taught my children to do the same, creating a household where love was conditional on success and connection was secondary to accomplishment. When the pastor invited people to come forward for prayer, I stood before I made a conscious decision. Felix appeared beside me, then Kelsey, then Nova, and Lynn. We stood together as a family for the first time in months, not because I engineered the reunion, but because we needed help. Jesus, I whispered, the name feeling foreign and familiar simultaneously. I've spent my whole life trying to be good enough, smart enough, successful enough to earn love. I've taught my children to do the same. I don't know how to receive what I can't achieve, but I'm desperate enough to try. The following month, we were back in California, but everything was different. Not because our circumstances had changed dramatically, but because our hearts had been transformed. Felix continued his recovery, but now our conversations focus on his fears and dreams instead of just his progress metrics. Nova and Lynn saw their father learning to ask about their feelings instead of just their grades. Most surprisingly, my relationship with my own parents began to heal. I started calling them weekly, sharing struggles instead of just successes, asking about their emotional lives instead of just their physical health. They share stories about their immigrant journey that I never heard, stories of loneliness, fear, and the faith that had sustained them through years of starting over. We thought we had to be a certain way to survive in America, my mother told me during one of our new, deeper conversations. We passed that burden to you, but it was never God's plan for any of us. Kelsey and I renewed our vows on our 16th wedding anniversary, but this time the promises we made were different. Instead of vowing to love each other perfectly, we vowed to point each other toward the perfect love of Christ. Instead of promising to solve each other's problems, we promised to walk together through whatever came, trusting that God's grace was sufficient for our weakness. I don't understand everything about Jesus or grace or faith, I told our small gathering of family and friends. But Jesus has shown me that I'm accepted not because of what I do, but because of what He's done through the cross. He's teaching me to receive grace so I can give it to my family. As Kelsey often reminds me, quoting something her grandmother used to say, love isn't a problem to be solved, baby. It's a gift to be received and passed on. And finally, I'm learning the difference.